How's it going, everybody? Japan has always had this really interesting music scene that doesn't seem to draw from as many outside sources as you might think it does. If you've seen my videos before, you know that I talk a lot about the more otaku side of things, so things like anime soundtracks or game soundtracks or anime openings and endings. But for the last 5 years or so, I've also been really interested in the non-otaku side of the music industry. Mostly because a lot of their songwriters and composers have this really interesting, unique way of writing music that you just don't hear in other kinds of music. And so that sort of led me to ask the question of, well, where do these people come from? I mean, not geographically, obviously they're all coming from Japan, but more along the lines of where are these Japanese artists actually getting all these ideas from, and what kind of training or education kind of led them to make these choices. And so I did a little digging and, well, I think the title says it all. So to quickly cover a few things that are going to be relevant to what I'm talking about, music has a bunch of different systems that make it work the way it does, and even if you have no music training, you probably have heard a bunch of these before, whether you know it or not. Now, the most basic music system for English speakers is probably the lettering system, and that's basically just that each note has its own name based on the first 7 letters of the alphabet. The next most basic thing is probably the solfege system, which most people probably know from The Sound of Music.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, so, do.
And something that's a little bit less basic but is just as easy to understand is scale degrees, which is just assigning a number instead of a letter to any of the notes. So instead of something like a C in the key of C major being a C, it would be a 1. Getting a little more intricate with the things I'm going to talk about, there's also the fixed do system and the movable do system. And essentially what these things are is that in the fixed do system, you replace the letter names with the solfege names. So C is always do. If you were to play in say a D Dorian scale, that would be re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, re.
That felt really weird to say.
And for most English speakers, you're probably more familiar with the movable do system, which basically just has it following the scale that you're in. So if we moved from C major to E major, instead of starting on the syllable mi, since E is me, the do moves to E with it. Maybe that was a little hard to understand, but basically what it boils down to is that fixed do and the lettering system are the same, and movable do and scale degrees are the same. We also have different lettering systems for different regions, so take the German system, which starts on C, then goes D, E, F, G, back down to A, and what do you think comes next? That's right, H. Because thanks to some ancient copyist having bad handwriting, the flat looked like a lowercase b, and the lowercase b wasn't closed at the bottom, so it looked like a lowercase h. And so in Germany, B flat is B and B is H. There's also the Italian system used in a lot of Latin language-based regions, and this basically just takes the fixed do system and uses the Italian word diesis for sharp and bemole for flat. So instead of a C sharp, you would have a do diesis. There are a ton of other systems for other regions in the world as well, but basically all you need to know is that they all work perfectly fine as long as they don't mix with each other. So what do you think Japan does? Now, you would think that a country with this many amazing artists would also have a really good music education system. And you would be wrong. Now, I'm not really an expert on the way that they actually go about teaching music, so I'm not going to be talking about that, but it's more the way the system works as they get brought up as musicians or composers or whatever. So at a young age, Japanese children learn the fixed do system in school. And while I don't find the fixed do system to be as useful as the movable do system, it works perfectly fine from a basic teaching perspective. And so basically this just means that instead of the letter C, you have the note do. And that note do is always going to be called do the same way we always call the letter C, C. And this doesn't sound so confusing yet, but as soon as you speak to a Japanese musician, you'll quickly realize that they speak in terms of letters. And not just the fact that they're using the lettering system, but depending on what kind of professional musician they are, they'll be using different lettering systems. On the classical side of things, they use the German system, but on the contemporary and pop side of things, they're using the English system. And in this this day and age, I'm pretty sure most of the classical musicians know both the German and the English system, so really, I don't know what the point of learning the German one is. But the main question I have is, when did they even learn these lettering systems? I mean, if you think about it, they were learning the fixed do system from a young age, so why didn't they just stick with that going into the professional world? Italy and a whole bunch of other places already do that, so it's not like it would be a weird system. And let's not forget our good old Japanese system, because Japan obviously had to have their own music system too. And I'm not talking about traditional Japanese scales or instruments, I'm talking about when it comes to naming things in classical settings. This pretty much only pertains to how you would title something in a Japanese context. So let's say you had a Beethoven piece in C minor. We have the Japanese words for minor and major, which are tancho and chocho, but instead of just calling it shi tancho, they use the iroha system. And what is the iroha system? The iroha system is kind of similar to the alphabet. It's based on this 1,000-year-old poem that uses each character from Japanese's syllabary only once, including the now obsolete we and we. And this was later popularized as a way to sequence things. So in terms of the musical scale, which only takes 7 letters, that would take the first 7 characters of the iroha poem, those being I, ro, ha, ni, ho, he, to. The Japanese system also has its own words for sharp and flat, which are e and hen. And while I'm not the most well-informed person on the classical music scene in Japan, I really don't think I've ever seen or heard these things outside of a naming context. So let's break this down for a second. Japan is using the fixed do system to teach children music. Popular and contemporary musicians are speaking in terms of the English lettering system, classical musicians are speaking in terms of the German system, and classical naming conventions are using the Japanese system. What? Now, the first time I even realized this was an issue was back when I was living in a share house with mostly Japanese roommates. One was a professional bassist, one had learned piano as a kid, and one just liked to sing poorly in the shower. And believe me, it was bad. Basically what happened was I was talking to the bassist one time about music stuff, and both of us could fully understand each other because we were using the English lettering system. The piano player came in and asked us what all the letters we were talking about were since we were talking about music. Back then, I didn't even realize the fixed do system was a thing, so when she pointed at a keyboard to me and told me that C was called do, I just thought she was straight up wrong. I can understand a little better now, but it was when she was pointing to the black keys that really threw me off. Because I had never heard of the fixed do system, I didn't realize that there were names for those in Italian already. The first thing that happened when I moved from C to C sharp, she didn't say do diesis, she said do sharp. And at that moment, my reaction to this was basically just, what is going on with Japan? But that showed me that even after 10 years of amateur piano lessons, she had never been taught letters. Which brings me back to one of the earlier points, when do these professional musicians actually learn about letters? And the more important question, why even learn the fixed do system if you just have to learn the lettering systems at a higher level anyway? I don't think other places that use the fixed do system have to worry about this because they learn it all the way from being an amateur to being a professional, but for Japan it just seems really redundant. I get that solfege syllables are easier to sing and that Japanese kids might not be familiar with English letters yet, but I feel like learning letters from the beginning cuts out the unnecessary step of having to relearn everything they've already learned up until that point, but now in a new system. I mean, outside of the most basic of music contexts, Japan's music education system doesn't support the fixed do system. And that kind of brings up another point. Why does the iroha system still exist if it's only used in naming contexts? If professional musicians and composers are already speaking in terms of letters in both the contemporary and the classical world, then what's the point of continuing to use an archaic naming system? It might make a little more sense if it were tied to more traditional Japanese scales or traditional instruments, but having learned a bit of koto myself and having spoken to a professional shamisen player, most traditional Japanese music is learned by rote memory, and those that actually have sheet music are written in cipher notation, which is just a series of numbers and symbols not too dissimilar from scale intervals. Really, I feel like Japan should have just gone all in with the iroha system, and that would have cut out all the redundancies that you find in their education system. The iroha system is exactly the same as the lettering systems and the fixed do system, and it's already in their native language, so I don't see why they didn't just go with that. But I mean, look, I know it's Japan. They're not going to fix this anytime soon, and if they do, it's going to go through a million middlemen, and probably about 10 fax machines. So no matter how redundant all of these systems are, it's just going to take way more effort than anyone's going to feel like it's worth to get rid of them. Like I said before, I don't like the fixed DOS system, but if they had implemented that from start to finish, I would be completely fine with their understanding of it. You know, even if they ended up using some disgusting term like do sharp instead of do diesis or C sharp. But there's nothing I can do about this, because unless I become a Japanese politician or marry a Japanese politician, I don't think I'm going to convince anyone over there that this is a problem that needs to get fixed. But what do you guys think of Japan's redundant and confusing music education system? Do you think there are any merits to separating the amateur and professional world, and then also separating both professional worlds as well? Or maybe you think they're actually doing it better than everyone else does? Let me know down in the comments below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel. You can also support me by becoming a patron over on my Patreon and by following all of my other social media accounts. Thanks as always for watching, and I will see you in the next one.